Hey everyone, so we've been talking a lot about how the battle is going to go, what are the matchups, what will be the outcomes, but there's also one really big hanging question mark of what exactly is going to happen to the island of Onigashima itself. It has been flying for so long now that it kind of just feels natural, like, oh yeah, and the island's flying, that's happening too. And of course, we all know it's going to be addressed or resolved in some way, but I think the significance of what exactly happens to Onigashima may be somewhat underestimated by the readers at the moment, since what ultimately happens with Onigashima, where it lands, how it lands, if it lands at all, actually probably dictates the entire future of the Wano arc, because there is a tremendous amount of meaning potentially attached to the fate of this island. So before we get into that, make sure to subscribe for more One Piece content every week. Now, yes, obviously plot-wise it matters what happens to Onigashima. Factually, if Onigashima lands on the flower capital as is, it will probably kill a lot of people, seeing as there are huge crowds in the flower capital for the festival, and Onigashima is it's literally an island falling from the sky on top of them. But I'm talking beyond just the logistics of Onigashima landing on the flower capital. To start with, one thing in general that Oda likes to do at the climax of major arcs is introduce some sort of ticking time bomb of impending doom. Sometimes these time bombs are literal, such as the bomb in Alabasta. Other times it's a product of the villain's abilities, like Doflamingo's birdcage, or Enel's Raigo, or maybe it's just some sort of outside force that has become a problem, like the Buster Call, or the Noah falling, or even just the sun coming out in Thriller Bark. But the point is that very, very often when Oda wants to sort of max out the stakes of the situation, really add some sense of urgency to the climax, he will make it to the final fights, and particularly Luffy's final fight, always takes place with some sort of great calamity approaching in the background. And usually Luffy's victory times up pretty close to the resolution of that outside problem. For example, after defeating Lucci, the Going Merry arrived to save them from the Buster Call. Luffy beat Crocodile right after the bomb was disposed of. Luffy defeating Doflamingo itself was the solution to the birdcage, and so on. So with Onigashima, we've got that sort of setup of Luffy versus the big bad, mano a mano at this point, with the ticking time bomb being the floating island of Onigashima itself, potentially landing in the flower capital. However, for those of you who have watched my video analyzing fights in One Piece, you know that there is also a very, very common trend Oda likes to use with the finales to final battles, which is that Oda likes to write in a lot of thematic meaning when it comes to how the final blow is delivered, where it happens, what the larger effect of that final blow is, and so on. For example, Luffy defeating Crocodile by sending him from underground out up into the surface, out into the open, was symbolic of the hidden crime boss finally being pushed out into the open and exposed for who he truly was. Luffy sending Doflamingo to the ground and destroying Dressrosa in the process was symbolic of not only knocking Doflamingo down from his ascendant status, but also of how the country needs to be destroyed in order for a new land of freedom to be born. Luffy defeating Arlong while also taking down Arlong Park in the process was symbolic of the end of Arlong's rule over the village. Luffy defeating Enel while ringing the bell was the resolution to almost every single thematic thread in the arc, etc. Just watch that video if you want a more in-depth breakdown of what I'm talking about, but the point is that Oda puts a lot of thought into how the villain is defeated and what can be said with their defeat to tie into the ideas of the arc. The point is that things like the destruction of Dressrosa, the ringing of the bell, the assault on Noah, the abolishment of Arlong Park, these are all powerful accompanying visuals that often go along with Luffy's final blow to give it greater symbolic meaning. And so looking at Onigashima approaching the flower capital, there are a lot of possibilities that can come from this island. Onigashima itself can easily be viewed as a symbol of Kaido's rule. I think that's fairly obvious. It seems like a giant symbol of his power and his reign over Wano. The fact that it's about to land in the flower capital, which has been repeatedly noted as the last beautiful, thriving province in Wano, essentially the heart and center of Wano, the fact that Onigashima is about to land there could give us some ideas on what needs to happen to Onigashima. I think that if this is the final battle, that Onigashima can never land in Wano. I've seen people say the battle could go many ways, that maybe a lot of it takes place in the sky, and then the finale takes place once it's touched down. But I'm saying that if you believe that this is the final battle, then Onigashima probably just never touches down. I'm not talking from a logistical perspective. You can certainly make the argument that people in the flower capital could feasibly evacuate from the flower capital if they got fair warning of what was coming. However, looking at it symbolically, Onigashima is the symbol of Kaido. It's the symbol of his rule, his reign over Wano, right? The reason Oda initially drew Onigashima as detached from the mainland of Wano is that up till now, Kaido has been ruling from afar, with Orochi as his puppet who rules the mainland of Wano. But now that Kaido wants to take full control and really make this nation his own, what does that mean? Well, the symbolism of Onigashima, this giant demonic structure, coming down and crushing the last prosperous region of Wano, replacing it as the new center of Wano, that is not going to be a winning moment for the good guys. If you are an author, having a giant symbol of Kaido descend from the sky and take its place as the heart and center of the nation is exactly the type of imagery you would write in if the bad guys just won and asserted dominance over the land. So if you think that this is the final battle and that Kaido and company have to be defeated during this raid, then Onigashima is probably never going to touch down in Wano. If it comes down, then that probably means Kaido just won. So let's start keeping track of possibilities of things that can happen with Onigashima and what it means for the story if they came to pass. If Onigashima ultimately touches down in the Flower Capital, I'd say it is very, very, very likely that the Alliance was just defeated and we are starting a new phase of the Wano storyline. It would be very, very, very weird if the heroes won and we still got this imagery of this giant skull of Onigashima coming down to rest on top of the Flower Capital. So let me talk about another route, which is this interesting and popular theory that I'm sure some of you have seen going around, which is that Momonosuke may actually be able to prevent Onigashima from landing in Wano, at least temporarily, by creating flame clouds to hold it up. And that may be the big Momonosuke moment that things are leading up to. Now, it's not my theory, but I do support it, and I'll just quickly add in my reasons why I think that this would be a great idea. First of all, the obvious parallels that would make between Momonosuke and his father, how Oden essentially carried a heavy burden for the sake of the people of Wano for 5 years, how that is simply the kind of man Oden has always been, how Momonosuke has been striving throughout Wano to live up to his father's name, all of that coming together with Momonosuke performing an act very similar to what his father did, but arguably on an even grander scale. That would bring a tremendous amount of respect to Momo from the people of Wano, and give them faith in the Kazuki name again, as well as be a huge leap forward for Momo's character. Not to mention that it just makes sense based on Momo having the same devil fruit as Kaido, and seemingly also being able to produce the same flame clouds, as well as the fact that Momo's fear of heights has been repeatedly stressed, meaning that Momo having to fly to save the Flower Capital is another step forward for his character as well. And lastly, just the fact that Oda has been hinting at the significance of the abilities of Momo's dragon fruit for some time now. I think the theory that Momonosuke will hold up Onigashima is really, really good. I believe it, but I don't think that it actually necessarily tells us anything about what will ultimately happen to Onigashima itself. For example, if Onigashima is ultimately meant to touch down in Wano, that can still happen even if Momonosuke holds it up at first. All that would really matter is if he holds it up long enough to give the people of the Flower Capital time to escape, similar to how Oden held up the scabbards for a while so that they were then able to escape. Now, on the other hand, maybe Momonosuke holds up the island from falling on the Flower Capital, but then floats it away after Kaido is defeated, which I don't personally think works as well, as I don't think holding up the island is going to be something easy for Momo in the first place. If we assume that it's going to parallel Oden's experience, the point of this whole incident was that it was a metaphor for the heavy burden Oden was having to bear alone for his people for 5 years, and that it was very difficult for him to do so. So I think some of the significance of Momonosuke protecting Wano by holding up the island would be a little diluted if it's easy for him, meaning if he can not only hold up the island without a problem, but also just float it all the way back to where it was before. I also think it would just be a really weirdly slow resolution of the arc, where we have the island floating over slowly for a while, and then floating back for a while. And more importantly, going back to the discussion at the start of the video, how would this play into the manner in which Luffy defeats Kaido? Because again, how Luffy delivers the final blow, where it happens, and what the accompanying visual is, these are all things that matter a lot in One Piece. So when we've got a giant visual to work with, like Onigashima, and if we assume this is the final battle, what makes the most sense in terms of how it works with the final blow? Well, for a long time, the importance of opening the borders of Wano country was being stressed. The fact that Wano is an isolationist nation and needs to be opened up sort of fits with the notion that it needs to be freed in general. For a while, I was looking at the geography of Wano and thinking that maybe this would involve the whole nation being brought back down to sea level, but it's almost impossible to imagine how that would work with the final blow. I mean, if Luffy hit Kaido into the ground so hard it literally collapsed the island's, raised structure that Wano is built upon, so it just comes crashing down to sea level, I don't know, that just seems kind of ridiculous to me. So if Wano had some literal physical walls around it that could be broken down, maybe those could be broken down, but it doesn't have those, so that doesn't really work. Which is why now I'm wondering if maybe we are going to get some sort of symbolism of breaking out or breaking free or borders being opened. Maybe it could have something to do with Onigashima being destroyed in a way that the walls sort of explode in an outwards direction. If we got something like that, then it would fit the idea of opening up borders, a sense of freedom, as well as getting the visual of Onigashima being destroyed, so the symbol of Kaido's rule being destroyed. This would be similar to Arlong Park's destruction in the process of Luffy defeating Arlong. Even this seems somewhat strange to me logistically though, because if Onigashima were to be destroyed so that it sort of explodes outwards, how would Luffy even cause that effect? It's hard to think of a punch or a move that he would have that would do that. Now, on the other hand, maybe I'm just trying to force in the idea of opening borders, and it doesn't work that well here, or it's not that important. So maybe it will just be something simpler like Onigashima itself being destroyed by just being collapsed or something like that in a more straightforward manner, similar to Arlong Park. But that's also really difficult to pull off because there are a lot of people inside Onigashima as well, like the entire alliance is inside Onigashima. So maybe now you can see where I'm coming from when I say that what happens to Onigashima is a very curious question to tackle because there's no neat solution that cleanly makes sense. If the alliance is going to win here, then I don't think Onigashima will ever land in the Flower Capital because symbolically that would be a very weird climax that visually doesn't really fit. If Momo stops it, which I think he will, that still only provides a temporary solution unless Momo flies it all the way back, in which case, again, wouldn't that make for a very anticlimactic resolution of 20 chapters of slowly flying this island back as the fights finish up after 20 chapters of flying it to the Flower Capital? If we're going to get to see Onigashima destroyed for the symbolism, then one, how would Luffy do that effectively when everyone is inside Onigashima? If Luffy is meant to destroy it so that it specifically breaks apart in a sort of outward direction, then what sort of attack would he do to accomplish that? So these are the questions I have. I think if this is the final battle, then to me the outcomes I think are most viable are, yes, Luffy using some sort of new attack that we are not thinking of that would effectively destroy Onigashima from the inside to break apart in a way that the walls break apart outwards, not killing the alliance inside and also carrying some sort of sense of freedom or opening of borders. I think it would be really cool if this happened while Momo was holding Onigashima simultaneously above the Flower Capital, so that everyone in the Flower Capital, they've had enough time to get away, but they're still within viewing distance to be able to see Onigashima shatter in the skies, symbolizing Kaido's defeat. Now, if Luffy does not have some sort of attack that can cause this effect of sort of breaking apart outwards, however, then I think a possible alternative maybe could be Momo carrying Onigashima a little ways away from the Flower Capital to drop it off on the top of Mount Fuji. Mount Fuji is, after all, very close to Onigashima, and I think that would generally keep some of the drama of Momo having to struggle to hold up a heavy burden, since it would only be carrying Onigashima a short distance away from the Flower Capital, rather than just casually floating it, all the way back out to the ocean. I do think it would still be a little weird to end the arc with Onigashima just sitting on top of Mount Fuji. Again, that's kind of an ominous visual to end with rather than a victorious one. But still not as bad as Onigashima actually landing in the Flower Capital. Besides that, I think another possibility is that Onigashima has some unknown properties that we don't know about yet, which could completely change what the island can potentially do and open up a new door we haven't been thinking about. After all, Marco hinted that there is more to Onigashima than we've been seeing. And of course, there's still the possibility that Onigashima isn't going to be destroyed or removed from the story just yet, and that it will touch down in the Flower Capital as Kaido and the Beast Pirates defeat the Alliance. That is, of course, the route that I would personally prefer. But, all that being said, if you enjoyed this video, then definitely like, comment, and subscribe, and you can support me on Patreon to get my extended thoughts on this and all future topics.